I'm going to just assume that everybody that's meant to be here is here. So what I'll do is hand over to Jenny Martin, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Innovation. And she's just going to, welcome us and sort of start to set the scene. So Jenny, can I hand over to you, please?
Oh, thank you, Jay. That's fantastic. Absolutely. It's always great working with you. Welcome everyone to the first in a series of lunchtime conversations showcasing research undertaken by Blue Futures. As Jade mentioned, I'm Jenny Martin. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research and Innovation at the University of Wollongong, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Blue Futures series to you here today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that country for Aboriginal peoples is an interconnected set of ancient and sophisticated relationships. I acknowledge that where I am speaking from today and from where you are listening, the custodianship of Aboriginal peoples has kept alive the relationships between all living things in this sacred landscape. I acknowledge the devastating impact of colonisation on country and its custodians and commit us all to truth-telling, healing and education. A deep engagement with country is central to Blue Futures and the conversations we'll be having throughout the series. Blue Futures is a partnership between the University of Wollongong and the Illawarra Local Aboriginal Land Council. Central to the research is the ways Aboriginal approaches to country can inform, challenge, and extend research practice. Blue Futures is a keystone project in the Global Challenges program at UOW. The aim of Global Challenges is to harness the diverse expertise of researchers so that innovative solutions can be found for real-world problems. Research teams brought together by Global Challenges address problems that are beyond the scope of a single discipline, and they do that in collaboration with industry, government, and wider community. Of particular importance to Global Challenges is finding practical and meaningful responses to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which include protecting the environment, fostering innovation, building sustainable cities and communities, and tackling climate change. I'm really proud that UOW has demonstrated its commitment to these goals by embedding them in our 2020 to 2025 strategic plan. And this year, the University of Wollongong ranked 6th in the world from over 1,000 universities in the Times Higher Education Global Impact Rankings, which are measured on the basis of the Sustainable Development Goals. I, for one, couldn't be prouder of that achievement, although I will be prouder when we get to number 1. But the true measure of impact is not a ranking such as this. It's the legacy we create for future generations, and that's why Blue Futures is so important. Blue Futures embodies the aims of Global Challenges in a very tangible way. The project includes scientists, data modelers, economists, policymakers, social geographers, writers, and artists. And together, the Blue Futures researchers are planning for a future that is sustainable for governments, for industries, for ecosystems, and for communities. The Blue Futures project places values at the very heart of its research. If we aim to create a sustainable future for our oceans, coasts, and waterways, we need to reflect on what we value in those places and to understand our interconnected relationships to these places. An underlying question of the research is, what do you imagine a blue future looks like? And this is one of the questions our panelists will try to answer today. We hope the conversation will also give you the opportunity to reflect on this question too. In this session, members of the team will discuss 3 streams of Blue Futures: anticipating and imagining, governing and guiding, developing and enabling. In particular, they will share stories of the ways Aboriginal-led research and Aboriginal approaches to country can have a meaningful impact on government, industry, and community responses to the marine environment. My apologies in advance that I need to leave at 1:30 for another commitment, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from all our panelists before then. It's now my great pleasure to introduce or to return you back to my colleague, Jade Kennedy, UN Knowledge Holder and Senior Lecturer in Indigenous Knowledges at UOW. Jade will be chairing today's conversation. Thanks, Jade.
Thank you, Jenny, and thanks for that introduction. Yeah, look, that's not really me. I'm just Jade Kennedy from the Illawarra, you know, and I think most of you I've had opportunity to bounce into, and I really appreciate the ways in which you guys have shown up today and are going to be a part of a conversation. So please just sort of kick back wherever you are. I really appreciate the way people are already engaging in chat. Thank you so much for your responsiveness. We're jumping onto your cameras and things, right? But we're here to be relaxed, but, you know, talk some serious facts too. So, you know me, you might hear a few swear words drop in. It's not offensive. We're just here to really start to flow this knowledge, yeah? And I guess for me, this is a real privilege. It's a real privilege to be a part of this crew, and it's a real privilege to be able to sort of chair and facilitate our yarns too, because today you're going to be hearing from some pretty good looking people, you know, but beyond that, what you're really going to be hearing from are the leads of what is an awesomely smart and sort of really special team. These guys are like really forward thinking. They're good looking too, but they also have just a willingness and a commitment to sort of address a new approach and a new way into going into a space that's, you know, really relevant for all of us today, right? And I don't want us to be sitting in this space where we think, you know, this sort of blue futures is this enigma, you know, and that it's this thing that's sort of too complicated to get our heads around. But I will say, you know, it is the ocean, it is the rivers, the creeks and the streams, but it's also economies, you know, and it's ecologies. And what for me is most important, it's about food. Right? So there's a whole bunch of things that's not really my place to say exactly, because that's what these guys are going to be sharing with you. So what I want to initially do, you know, is just get them to introduce themselves in a way that we've been getting used to. So as you're starting to hear, as Jenny was introducing, we've been using Aboriginal approaches to our research, and we've been using Aboriginal ways of engaging in our projects together. And so part of that, we introduce ourselves essentially from what's your name, where you're from. So I'm going to ask these guys, what's your name, where you're from? Then guys, I'm going to ask you maybe just your title to frame where you sit within your roles, and maybe a little bit about what you do. And if you can just share the stream that you'll be speaking to. So I'm going to do that, guys, with the people that are going to be sharing the leads that are speaking with you today. Then I'm going to share a little bit about the story. And most of you know I just like talking. So I'll try and be as brief and succinct as I can be, but I just want to give you guys a little bit of a background about how this came to be. What does, you know, following an Aboriginal approach to research mean, you know, because we banty those words around heaps, and a lot of the time it's bullshit, you know, and I'm here to say this is how we do it here, and this is what it means, right? And then I'm going to throw back to these guys that, you know, are going to introduce themselves in 6. They're going to start to share with you a little bit about their stream and how these Aboriginal approaches have influenced those streams. Then we'll come back in and we'll have a little bit of a chat around what a blue future looks like. And we are really inviting you guys to be asking questions and engaging in a conversation. So if for now you can throw your questions into the chat, Freya's going to sort of field those, and when the time's right, we'll start to introduce and invite you guys in to start to share those questions, and we can engage in that dialogue. So first of all, can I ask Josh, where are you on my screen, Joshy?
Here I am.
Name, where you from, brother?
Cool. Thanks, Jade. It's always really great to have a conversation with you. I'm Joshua Lobb, and I'm from inland New South Wales, growing up in drought. So I'm from a long way away from water and a long way away from the ocean. I'm a creative writing lecturer. I teach creative writing at UOW, and the stream that I will be leading today, or talking about today, is anticipating and imagining.
Thank you, Josh. Fantastic. Michelle, what's your name? Where are you from?
Hi everyone, Michelle Boyer. I grew up on the banks of the Hunter River in Maitland, and spent a lot of my childhood on the coast around the Port Stephens area, but now I live in Kiama. and I'm a Senior Research Fellow with the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security in the Faculty of Business, and I lead up the Governing and Guiding stream.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Hugh, over to you. What's your name? Where are you from, brother?
Hi, Hugh Forehead. I'm from the UK originally, ended up loving childhood on the South Welsh coast, but more recently Tasmania, and then fortunate to be in the Illawarra now. I'm a research fellow at the Smart Infrastructure Facility, and I lead the Developing and Enabling stream.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hugh. And just over to you, Paul. What's your name? Where are you from? What do you do?
So Paul Knight, I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Illawarra Local Aboriginal Land Council, and I'm just a general troublemaker in this group. So yes, just like Jade, we kind of tend to poke the bear and stir up a bit of trouble and make people think differently.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So guys, I just want to dream you back to like a year or two before COVID hit and restrictions and things. And, you know, it was a time and space at uni where people would meet quite regularly. And for me, we had like this motley crew of non-Aboriginal people just go, we're really interested in doing this stuff around, you know, blue futures. And we're like, what the frig is blue futures? And like I said, I'm not here to answer that part for you. They will. But what did occur in that moment was an invitation to a conversation and an invitation to a relationship to start to find ways in which we could initially apply for one of these Global Challenges grants, but, you know, and well, now we've been successful, obviously, but, you know, work towards authentically, you know, like sort of not this bullshit in writing or this, you know, referring to or whatever it is. What does this really mean? What's this Aboriginal approach mean? What does it look like? Yeah, so we all crammed ourselves into a room and, I don't know, shoulder to shoulder and interviewed, and we were successful. And so we then started to figure out, well, holy crap, you know, you all do this, right? You get your award and then you're like, what the freaking hell did we say we're going to do, right? But one of the things that we did know that we were going to do was we were going to follow this Aboriginal approach, and we were really dedicated to that. And then frigging COVID hit. So we had all these amazing plans, and what we thought we'd start with was this sort of, it's a bit like cultural awareness. I'm sure a lot of you guys have experienced this in different places and spaces. You know, let's start a baseline understanding of this country and what Aboriginal means and what are some of the terms and what are some of the themes. And we wanted to start into that space, but COVID hit. And it's like, for me, I've been one of those like major stalwarts that's totally against this cultural awareness online thing, right? So this was really challenging for me, because it sort of sat within my remit. My part of the project was that I was going to help with this cultural awareness initially, right? And I'm like, I'm totally anti-online, man. Like, it's bullshit. If you're doing Aboriginal stuff, like, you got to get on country, you've at least got to be in person, And so I was really struggling with this conceptually, but also sort of culturally and ethically, you know, like, how are we going to do this? But like all projects, there's timelines and there's this and there's that. And some of you guys might know, like, I'm running this program called Jindaola. I think it's pretty cool. Like, you should come and check it out, but we can plug that later. I was also, though, stuck in that space, having to consider what this transition into online was. And so what we did was we sort of held this session that's around these key concepts that we use quite regularly within the Jindaola program and across other places and spaces. And that's what we call in Maramal. It's this concept and framework of country, kinship, culture, journey, and connectedness. And so we found this online space. I'm talking like, maybe Michelle or Josh, you can give me an idea of the number of participants in our Big Blue Futures crew. What have we got? There's like 20 plus of us, isn't there?
Yeah, somewhere between 20 and 30, depending on
the day, right? So we've got a pretty big crew, guys. And, you know, I'm like, okay, let's get us online. And how are we going to engage everybody? You know, so from an Aboriginal perspective, everybody needs to speak. Everybody needs to be contributing. Everybody needs to be engaged. And that comes through the conversation. And so we started to move people through these frameworks online initially. So starting to get familiar with terms, starting to get familiar with concepts, and starting to be able to identify with different values constructs that are attached to these words. You know, like, there's these words that we all use, but sometimes they mean different things. And when we're speaking about following an Aboriginal approach, what we're speaking about is how do we position, possibly reposition, but situate Aboriginal knowledges, perspectives, and especially values. How do we start to bring Aboriginal values into the conversation that's leading the projects that we's undertaking? And so we're doing this online, man. And to be honest, like, it was really cool. And it became really cool because people were willing to be vulnerable. And so for me, this is one of the things, like, we may not say that that's Aboriginal, but in this space, vulnerable has absolutely been attached to the ways in which we are starting to relate to these values. Individuals, these researchers within this space and place of Blue Futures, looking at themselves and engaging, although it'll be online and there'd be a bit of distance between us, but authentically looking at their own stories, processing and translating these concepts, and then sharing them with each other. So this is how we begin, right? And this is on a personal level. This has got nothing to do, I was about to go, oh, fuck all of it. But anyway, just sit with me, right? This has got nothing to do yet with the projects. This is just purely trying to raise our awareness. And then when we had a moment, like some of you guys might remember, there was like a gap of fresh air for a second there in 2020 where we could all like hang out again and you didn't have to wear masks and shit, but you still had to have singular packed food. Do you remember that period of time in our history, just quite recently? So we were in this mode, yeah? And so what we did, like, hey, we've got to start getting some idea around our projects. Like, what are we doing, right? And so these guys had come up with these really cool sort of, what are we calling it? These imagining and disabling and whatever the one Michelle's is governing, right? We had these different streams already identified, but we were still trying to articulate and identify what projects would come under these, right? So we got together on the innovation campus and we spent the whole day together, right? And we just started mapping. And we use the concepts of country, kinship, culture, journey, and connectedness within each of these streams. And so what we started to do was a whole heap of circle work, right? So we were really starting to cross this boundary between personal and professional. Yeah, so people really sitting in that vulnerable, sharing their relationships with place, their relationships to these constructs and values, this country, kinship, culture, journey, connectedness. And look, these sorts of concepts will be articulated at more depth in another place, eh? Today, this is really about introducing these streams, introducing how some of these Aboriginal knowledges and perspectives have had influence, but really, I'm so sorry, alarms and phones, but we'll get there. Like, you guys will start to hear and understand how these things work, you know, and what the constructs really help us to develop. But we're mapping out, like, we've got this big room over at the innovation campus and we've got, you know, all these teams, and we're doing this sort of like, you know, cross-disciplinary stuff or cross-stream stuff. And we're sort of identifying how we relate to place, how we relate to people, how we relate to the ways in which we're situating our projects, what's the histories and the stories. This is a part of this framework, how all of this connects. So we've got this sort of movement occurring. And we start to identify, you know, if we're going to follow an Aboriginal approach, then what we're looking at is knowledge-based relationships. What are the knowledges that we are interested in, and how do those knowledges translate and relate to the projects that we are thinking about? And so people just start going for it. And it was amazing. It was a cool day. It's just, they don't like feed you a lot when they pack it singly. You know, it's not as good as the old buffet. So we just crack away and, you know, all of a sudden we're back in lockdown, and it's, you know, not very happy days because Jay doesn't like the online, and nor do most of the crew. Like, the Blue Futures people are, you know, those sort of like surfers and scientists, and we're just a general pack of weirdos. But the thing is, we did get another opportunity around Christmas to go to Gerringong, and this is where it all shifts. So what I will say that, yes, from an Aboriginal perspective, you need time in place together, like physically. And if people want to say country, this and that, like, it's about being in a particular place for an extended period of time. I cannot emphasize anymore the value of being able to spend time to think, like spending time with knowledge, spending time yarning, you know, allowing yourselves to build that relatedness beyond the professional. You know, this is the thing for Blackpool. We say Humpies have got no doors, man, you know. There's no distance between our personal and our professional. All of this conflict of interest shit's bullshit. It's if I know you personally, then professional, like when I'm talking professional, I'm talking what's the knowledges that connect us? What is the knowledge that we are exchanging and translating together, and how are we conceptualizing? And so we spent 3 days together in Gerringong, you know, and we've really cracked it out. We're starting to really sit within this framework: country, kinship, culture, journey, connectedness. We're starting to think about other frameworks like, you know, who are the right people? Who are the right people to be involved in these projects, right? What are the right places? These are Aboriginal frameworks. What are the right places? What's the right language? What's the right languages that we should be using? And like, I'm talking like, what's the right communication in this space, you know? What's the right time? Like, what does time mean? We can sort of go, oh, you know, they're Blackfell and their time, and Koori time, or this time. No, like, what's the right time? Like, how does knowledge sit? Where do things need to marinate, you know? And that's what we did. So we start to bring these projects in, and we start to socialize them with each other, and we start to speak in this space. And what I can really say is that this time in Gerringong, like, you know, we had this sporadic experience, online, offline, and then we had 3 days, and it was just like, this is when it all came together. It's just, we walked away solid. It's like, you know, we had a really mad family holiday, not one of those ones where everyone ends up punching up at the end of it. You know, like this was like crazy. We just got in there and we all walked away sort of going, hey, I now know what it is that I'm doing. And this is what we're saying, like an Aboriginal way, like people want to sit there and say, hey, what's the lingo, or what's the epiphany in this? You know, what's the stuff, this mysterious, rocky, so you know what, it's relationships, man. And it's being driven and focused around the knowledges. Yeah, there's, you know, that, what do they call it? Traditional ecological knowledge stuff in there. Yeah, absolutely. There's language in there. Yeah, absolutely. There's some particular things that sit within Aboriginal stories. Yeah, absolutely. But we're talking about the way. It's the way in which we did this. We started every morning with a circle. What's your name? Where you from? Where you at? We continued to build relationships around the knowledges that we were sharing. We consistently leant back on these frameworks. How do we ground it in place? How do we acknowledge and respect the appropriate people? Who's our kin, right? What's our culture? What's our values? What's our customs? How do they translate to each of these projects? And then how do these projects relate to each other? What's the story? Like, what's the history in the space? So that we're not, you know, treading on something that's sacred, or disrespecting, or, you know, not identifying appropriately with what's the history, what's the timeline, right? How's it connected? What's the interconnectedness? Coming back to these, who are the right people? What are the right places, right? And so it's relying on these frameworks and reminding ourselves and being in relationship, not only with each other, but the knowledges that we're sharing and engaging with. So that's enough of me. I talk too much bullshit. So there's 2 questions, right, that I'm going to ask these crew initially. So that's going to be Josh, Michelle, and Hugh. And then I'm going to jump over and, you know, call on Paul to sort of share with us the significance of following Aboriginal approaches to research and Aboriginal approaches just to projects with, you know, real life outputs and, you know, outcomes, you know, like what's the significance here? But the questions I'm going to ask is, look, guys, can you please initially, and I'll come back to you. So Josh, can you please describe for us your stream? Give us a bit of detail around that. And then can you speak into the space of how has following an Aboriginal approach influenced, you know, you, the rest of your team, the research, etc. How has the Aboriginal approaches had influence? Thanks, Josh.
No worries, Jaden. And the first thing that you ever said to me when we first met is, let's have a conversation. You said, let's sit down and have a conversation. And I think that's one thing which is really, really important about what we've been doing, is that we start with, let's have a chat first, and we see where we're going in that space. And I think that's one of the really important things that Anticipating and Imagining, which is my stream that I'm leading, is about, is that we are thinking about how we can have conversations with people about the coastal and marine spaces that they belong to. So as part of our research, we're sitting down with people and asking them questions around what they feel about ocean spaces, coastal spaces. I do have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share, so I'm going to awkwardly do that, move into that space. Hopefully it'll be appearing on your screen now. Hooray. So in anticipating and imagining, we are mainly arts and humanities researchers, social geographers, writers, artists and designers. And if I can get my screen to work, they're the main people who we've been working together in our particular stream. You might know some of these people. And I really want to acknowledge the work that everybody has done in this stream. It's been really wonderful to have such a great team of people with so many different diverse knowledges. Our focus has been on gathering material from our past and our present to think about the way in which these conversations might inform the future. So we all have really strong connections to place, and in particular this coastal space that we're in the Illawarra. Many of us spend our mornings in the water or along rivers which lead towards the water. So part of it has been about, within our group, just saying, what are our stories, what are our memories, what are our experiences, and then taking that out into the world. I'm going to be a little bit academic here for you, Jade, sorry. But a really important thing that happened to me when I was doing the research for this project is I came across the cultural studies writer Paul Gilroy, who said that in order for us to think about this space, we have to move away from what he called high altitude theorizing towards a lowly watery orientation. And that's about that idea of just bringing us back down into the water and experiencing what we do in that space. So it's about valuing that. I'm going to share with you a really, really daggy and very messy scribble that we worked on really early on when we were thinking about what anticipating and imagining might mean. Because one of the things we talked about really early on was that anticipating and imagining almost have the same meaning. And I'm a word person, so it was kind of hard for me to try and work out what the difference is between these two words. They're both about speculation, but they deal with speculation in slightly different ways. So anticipating is about what I think is about what we know. It's about preparing for a known future. So we've been calling this informed speculation. What do I know, and how might that allow me to imagine or think about what the future might be? And then imagining is more like guesswork. It's more like surmising. We're wondering about an unknown future. And many of us in the group are writers and artists, so we're actually thinking imaginatively. So we've been calling that generative speculation, because it's about that idea of what can we do? What's the work that we do in our imagination that could take us into the future? So we've been thinking about what people already know about coastal spaces. So we've been trying to think about what other artists have done, what other thinkers have done, but also what lots of community groups have done, particularly in the Illawarra space. And we've also been drawing on our own imaginations and the imaginations of others. So what do they imagine a blue future might look like? And the three areas of the three projects that have kind of emerged from this, the first one there is on the screen now. It's called Stories from the Conti. And that's about actually sitting down with people from the continental pool and around it. The shark baiters who swim out in the ocean have also been a really important part of this conversation as well. What stories they tell about that particular place. So I've been sitting down with the regulars and asking them about their experiences in and around the pool. And I've been using that sense of belonging to kind of ask them to think about what they value about the place and how that might take them into how they might value the future or prepare for the future. Our second project is what we're calling Blue Futures Stories. And this is just starting to kick in at the moment. And that's where we're specifically asking this question, what do you imagine a blue future looks like? So this is where we actually want to bring out to the broader community. We're going to send this out to a whole range of people from a whole range of areas, surfers, scientists, poets, policymakers, whoever, to kind of think through what we all imagine a blue future might be like. And we're going to gather those statements to try and find stories that link us together in all these different groups. And our aim for that is to create a public event next year, if we can, where contributors meet and share the stories and work out ways in which we can put these imaginations into actual practice. And probably biggest of all is the Ways to Water exhibition at Wollongong Art Gallery that's been curated by Agnieszka Golder and Joe Sterling. This opens at WAG tomorrow, and it's going to be running until the 6th of Feb. And in this project, Joe and Agnieszka have curated a collection of artworks from the Wollongong Art Gallery collection that have something to do with water, often to do with water in local spaces. And one of the interesting things is that there are often places where multiple artists have looked at the same work, the same place, but at different moments in history. So we're asking, what are the stories around these particular places and how people engage with these spaces? Agnieszka and Joe have said that they're interested in a complex series of interconnections that merge when artworks from different times and cultures are brought together. In an exhibition, artworks form networks in a way that lend meaning to other artworks. So the artworks have all been placed in really interesting ways through themes, from the mountain to the lake, out to sea, etc. So we've brought together a whole lot of diverse artworks in interesting ways. And the kind of nice thing is also that the researchers from Blue Futures have been able to be part of the exhibition as well. So there's an augmented reality component where all the researchers in Blue Futures have been invited to share their own research and their own stories. So it's about, what have other people done? What are we doing in the present? And then what we want, what we hope is that people come to the exhibition and reflect on their presence and their belonging in these particular places. So I've got a little bit more to say, and it's in response to your question around how has the idea of thinking about following Aboriginal ways of thinking contribute to these particular projects. Really overtly, we've been thinking about how the 5 fingers of country that you've been talking about might fit into some of the conversations that we've had. So in the Continental Pool project, for instance, we've actually been asking what happens if we think about our sense of belonging to coastal places in this way. How might, if I'm having a conversation with somebody about their experience of the Conti, how might that correlate, or how might that be compared to Aboriginal ways of thinking? And I'm not wanting to colonize here. What I'm wanting to say is what are the things that we share in this space? And I think that one of the things that you've said really nicely is, I think I've got this quote on the next slide actually, is the, you've said, learn from country and be familiar with your place. You've got to be in a relationship with the story of your place and your story within your place. And I believe that belongs to all of us, that we all have an intimate relationship with country. We might not articulate it in that way. On this slide, you'll see I've also got a quote from a swimmer at the Conti who says, the ocean is embedded into me, because we're all water, right, in motion, and water communicates itself in different kinds of ways. So to me, that's a way in which people who swim in the pool might think about belonging to a place without necessarily articulating it in the way that you might. And that there have been so many discoveries in that space. The other kind of overt way is that we've been thinking differently about time and place. One of the things that from the conversations that we've been having is the way in which we've been talking about the way that the past and the future are present in the present. When we're in the present, we're also thinking about all our memories about that place and also what we're going to do in that place. And that's what country means to me, or is beginning to mean to me. So the exhibition is placing the future in relation to the past and the present, what artists have done in the past and how that might place further. So really crucially, time and place is important to the exhibition. And Joe and Agnieszka in particular made sure that they visited every place that has been represented in the artworks that they curated. So they wanted to understand that place in the present as well as the past. And I think that's that they have been profoundly moved by that. And sometimes they had to sneak out of their own LGA to do this. But it was kind of important, I think, for them to be able to do that in that space. The last thing I want to say, and I don't quite know how to articulate this, so I apologize if I don't say this as clearly as I want to say. But another word you use, Jade, is reciprocity. And I think that what's nice about Blue Futures is that we understand our responsibilities to each other. So when we research, we're not just doing research, but we have a responsibility to the people we work with. We want to treat them with respect and care, and that's our own researchers, but also the people who we are studying, if we're talking about it in that kind of way. But we have a responsibility too to the places that we work with. It's not just about, here I am looking at the Conti Pool. It's about, I'm giving something back to that place. I want to be able to take that, make that place seen to be valuable and important to everybody. And that's what I think I'm giving back to it. So I hope that's articulated where I'm coming from in this space. There's so much more, and it's so much more complicated than that, and so much less easy to talk about in words. But if we went for a walk along the beach, I'd be able to tell it to you maybe a little bit more detail sometime.
Well, because you'd be in place, right? And one of the things
right.
coming through and what we're wanting to share for you guys as we start to actualize, you know, what is this Aboriginal approach, and what you're wanting to hear come through, Josh, is there's a huge shift around relationship to place. There's this constant reference to belongingness and how that becomes articulated and through those relationships of values. So I just want to qualify one thing. We say country a lot. Hey, like it's apparently a black fella term some days, you know, and we've got these ideas of what that is. And sometimes it's sort of like psychically, or, you know, maybe even, I don't know, but we think of landscape, you know, and this is a really lovely space where we can sort of accept the coastlines, but what about the sort of waterscape, you know? And these guys are talking in terms of water lines. And what about the sky and the skyscape, right? So you do. Sometimes you'll hear people speak in terms of saltwater country, or, you know, eucalypt country, or whatever it might be. But when we're talking about country, we're talking about all living things, you know, and the values that are attached to those. And these are some of the things that I'm asking you guys to start hearing into when Josh is speaking back, because there's a lot of things happening, guys, you know. So I can't come in here and go, I've got 8 fucking minutes with you. Approach, take that, right? We've been at this for a very long time, and that's why I'm sharing this yarn, you know, like it was in very many different modes, you know, and it came together when we spent time. You know, and so there's a language, and there's terms, there's experiences, and there's things that are going to come out now that are just not even thought about, because these guys have been engaging in a particular way. So I'm just trying to bring it in for you as you start to hear the ways in which it can be differently articulated. So thank you so much, Joshy. That was beautiful. Someone also mentioned that in the chat. Absolutely, you're an eloquent man.
Jen Saunders is an amazing person. So I just want to say Jen Saunders is an incredible person. There we are.
Thanks for that, Josh, and I'll second that too. Hey, Michelle, we're over to you. Can you please now describe for us your stream, and then also please describe how you feel an Aboriginal approach and the things that we've been speaking about has influenced the research within your particular stream. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jade. When I thought about answering those two questions, I actually couldn't separate them, because they became so intricately connected. So the project developed in response to the learnings that we were having with you and with our discussions, and with taking an Aboriginal way through the research. So I guess I'm kind of telling a bit of a story about how that evolved and changed as we went through, and I hope you can see that screen now. Again, as like Joshua, I'd like to acknowledge quite a big team that we had behind us. People were dropping in and out for different parts of the projects, for different aspects of the projects, but everyone had an impact, and everyone made a contribution in various ways. So it's quite a long list. I won't go through them, but hopefully they all feel like they're recognised for the really important job that they did. So when I talk about this, this last 2 years as a bit of a journey, I guess you need to start from the beginning. And the idea behind the governing and guiding stream was to really link in with, if we're anticipating and imagining a blue future, then governance is an important pathway for us to get there. So how do we move from just anticipating and imagining into practicalities? Well, governance, of course, plays a really key role. And as a person that's been working in this space, researching ocean governance for a while now, and having worked in government as well, I definitely came into the project with a particular set of assumptions and a particular kind of way of thinking about governance that was really challenged through this project. And I think that was a really useful and important thing. So when we do governance, when we do ocean management activities, we tend to use or think about the concept of integration in particular quite a lot. So we're trying to bring together, for example, social, cultural, environmental and economic objectives, and kind of merge them all together into a, you know, really rational, evidence-based process and really objective. And basically all these little images you see here on the slide are just a small selection of the huge range of different models and tools and approaches and frameworks that have been developed to assist us to integrate and to bring together all these different kind of values and knowledges and ways of looking at the world. And what we tried to do is we're taking out the subjective elements. We're trying to remove them through this process. And essentially what we're almost doing is we're dehumanizing that process, because at the end of the day, these politics, subjectivity, emotion, spirituality, they will all influence the way we respond to governance processes. And so if we're working really hard to remove them from the process, I think we all know that inevitably they find their way back in some way. And that's usually in a reactive way once a position is made or a decision is made. And so that was, I guess, the problem statement that I had in my head at the beginning of this project, and engaging with the Aboriginal approaches that Jade has introduced us has really helped us to flip some of the ideas that we had on our head a little bit. Because fundamentally what we've done is it's quite ironic really when you think about it, is we've set up these systems and processes over the last couple of 100 years or so, which are aiming to fit in all these different types of knowledge and values. But one of the areas that we find most difficult to fit into those models is Indigenous cultural values. And this is deeply ironic considering they're our oldest living culture and with a proven sustainability track record. So that kind of led us to have this bit of a light bulb moment of going, well, actually, is there something fundamentally wrong with these frameworks if we can't make Indigenous cultural knowledge fit into these frameworks? If we finding that really difficult, then perhaps we might need to take a step back and have a look at those frameworks and think about whether they're fit for purpose. So that's kind of where our thinking has led to. We certainly don't have all the answers, but one of the really, I guess, interesting aspects of the learning is that from what we've learned over this last couple of years from Jade and Paul and Kath and our other Aboriginal colleagues, is that the Aboriginal ways of knowing tend to have emphasis on those values that we've actually tried to remove from our processes. So relationships in particular, relationships with nature, spirituality, and a range of different approaches that are really influential in Aboriginal cultures that we devalue within Western systems. So that led us to ask the question, well, where are the opportunities for reform? Where are the opportunities to reimagine how we do governance? And that's led to the development of two, we called them case studies. And I won't go into them in depth because we have two separate seminars that will look at each of them. But the first one was really about thinking around the process of making a decision and how collectively governance systems work from a decision-making process standpoint. So how do we create space in these decision-making processes for reconciling values and reconciling different forms of knowledge? And that's led to this development of Wollongong Nangan Ba Yamba. Sorry, Jade, I'm nearly there. I'm getting closer every time.
We'll get you there, don't worry.
Yeah, good. And I think, just very briefly, one of the initial discussions was around the name, that it's really difficult to say, and that is actually quite deliberate, because at the end of the day, we as non-Aboriginal people need to be doing some work in this relationship. We need to be trying to learn some of these difficult ideas that make us inherently uncomfortable in lots of ways. We felt uncomfortable so many times over this last 2 years, and it's been a really fantastic experience. And the second one is around actually looking at our existing governance frameworks and approaches and thinking about what are some of the alternatives to integration. Like, of course, integration works for some things really well, particularly things we can quantify. We can try and bring them all together into a common framework, but that tends to devalue some of the things that are difficult to quantify. So intangible values, for example, some of those ideas of subjectivity, spirituality, they're hard to kind of integrate into some of the systems we've set up in ocean governance. So what are some of these alternatives that we can look at? How can we create opportunities for coexistence and co-creation of knowledge within our governance systems? And that's, we particularly use the Ocean Accounts framework to explore that, and we'll be looking at that on the 18th of November. So hopefully over the next 2 weeks, you'll come back and hear about those ideas. So that's really it from me in terms of how the Aboriginal approach influenced the research. It changed the questions we asked. It definitely facilitated this kind of focus on relationships, and it definitely facilitated some very personal and professional transformations. And it really created space for thinking about these human values, the relational kind of values within not only our governance systems, but within the research itself and within the research team. Thanks, Joe.
No, thank you, Michelle, and thank you. I just want to really acknowledge and highlight for everybody that the vulnerability, like imagine how complex it must feel when all this time I keep like throwing these really difficult Aboriginal words at Michelle and she just stumbled, and to sit so uncomfortably but vulnerably. And these are some of the characteristics that we are generating through this process. But one of the things I want to really draw out for you guys in terms of the approaches that are relevant for Michelle and her team in this space is, you know, blackfellas, we use this word business. And whitefellas use this word too, but the ways in which we understand it is business is decision-making, it's governance, right? So how do we make informed decisions? And so there's this intersection now that Michelle and the team are looking at, you know, where there's the environment. And so from an Aboriginal perspective, all things living have agency. They have sovereignty, right? So this is what she's talking about. We're changing the questions. We now have to take into consideration a whole bunch of other shit because of this Aboriginal thing, you know? Like it just changes the ways in which we relate. When you have to acknowledge a tree as being sovereign and having its own knowledges and be a part of a knowledge system, and then that has to become a consideration now for any question thereafter that we're researching, this does make you very uncomfortable. And that's why we just threw really hard language at them too, you know, because we've got to have a laugh at the same time. But anyway, Michelle, thank you so much. And thank you for displaying and just, you know, actually walking the talk. It's really appreciated. Thank you, sis. Hugh, now it's over to you, my brother. How would you describe your particular stream? And then, you know, building off of that, how would you describe the influence maybe that the Aboriginal knowledges and perspectives have had on your research and projects, please, brother?
Oh, thank you, Jade. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, I'll start with a bit of a talk. I can't be as eloquent as Josh and Michelle, but I've had the pleasure of working with Michelle, with Jade in a previous project, and I sort of wrestled with how my background, I guess, is in technology, modeling, numbers, but I'm an ecologist and an environmentalist from way back. So I guess I've always had strong sympathies and wanting to make Jade's views, Indigenous views. I know this sort of stuff has potential to save the world, but I guess I've just been trying to find a way to actually make it work in my research. hopefully you'll get a bit of an idea of this. I'll start off with an introduction to the project, and yeah, then I'll try and describe a little bit about where I got to with this. Okay, that's looking all right. Great, thank you. Okay, so I've been, I guess, developing and enabling as a technology and business part of Blue Futures. I've been fortunate to work with a stellar team: Tillman Bowen, who's done their business stuff, Michelle, Lana Kalic, Catherine Moyle, Paul Jones, Johan Barthélemy, and Bilal Arshad. So I used, thank you. Yeah, I used as a background for these slides this map, because I felt as if the geography really framed what we did for developing and enabling, as I guess it did for the other parts of the project too. But this beautiful strip of coastline, it's long, lots of beautiful beaches, hills, escarpment, the waterways. So lots of opportunities to draw people in for tourism, natural resources for people doing fishing, for aquaculture. But by the same token, this really long stretch of land gives barriers to business. There's not much infrastructure because it's far from Sydney. So these barriers have led to difficulties for people doing business and high rates of unemployment. So we'd hoped, in I guess a sort of a fairly naive way, that we might be able to, by contacting business people, to bring them together and create a network of innovators. So whether that ends up being a physical thing where they could meet, or more likely an online sort of forum where these people could work together and develop synergies. And of course, we needed a hook for this, a reason for them to come together. And based on Tillman's experience with similar sort of things here in Wollongong, we came up with the idea of using some of the business expertise that we have, but also technology. So a common need that we saw for a lot of these people, and fortunately it turned out to be right, was measuring water quality. So typically oyster farmers, mussel farmers, people growing seaweed and things need to know what's in the water where they're growing their crops. But typically there's very few measurements being made, and they're sort of made at quite widely spaced intervals, not often where they're needed. So instruments for farmers to make their own are quite expensive, but thanks to the revolution in low-cost sensors, or the Internet of Things, we were able to offer them some low-cost solutions so that they could actually do their own measurements and also monitor their crop health using connected sensors as well. And fortunately, this has turned out to be quite a valuable tool for them. Again, as I said, mentioned, the water quality data is sparse, and it turns out it's also very difficult to reach. So there's a lot of agencies who are making these measurements. Sometimes different agencies making the measurements in the same waterways, but the information is sometimes stored on council computers or on databases that no one can get to. So in collaboration with Department of Planning, Infrastructure and Environment, we're building a database and a nice user interface to make life easier for putting the data into it, and a nice map-based interface for the public and researchers and the council people to be able to pull the data out again easily. So all this data will be put together and made available. And hopefully the sensor data will go in there too. And lastly, we're working on microplastics. So this is, unfortunately, as you're mostly aware probably, a ubiquitous source of pollution. And we're working with a PhD student, Nwanthi Christambuje, to develop ways to bioremediate microplastics. And we're starting off in wastewater treatment plants. Now, as I was saying, we sort of turned out we were sort of fairly naive. The blue economy is expected to grow considerably in the next decades, and we had hoped to bring everyone together. We started off with Lana Kalic's work, documenting some of the more innovative companies on the South Coast. Lana did a fantastic job of contacting these people through phone calls, through interviews, and through network analysis, documenting who was talking to who and how they related to various regulatory agencies and documents. We built on that with Tillman's expertise, value stream designs, and looking at the ways that we might integrate our technology into these businesses. And as Tom put it, instead of businesses come to uni, we took the uni to the companies. Thanks to a federal funding, the Entrepreneurs Program, Michelle, Tillman and myself had the pleasure of going down the South Coast and talking to a whole lot of different people in some fantastic places. And yeah, in short, the network did not eventuate yet. It turns out this is a long process. It's going to take more than a couple of years, but we've made some very good foundations along the way. We've learned ways to engage with Indigenous businesses. We've got funding. As I said, we had the Oz Industry funding for the road trip and some very useful help from Paul Coker and Richard Everson to help us to do that. So we've focused on building research capability for the future and identified ways that we might work with Indigenous people on the coast, particularly powerful work from the Gerringong meeting, where we looking at ways of using technology to build capability and capacity in Aboriginal communities, so that these communities can actually care for country and at the same time build educational and employment opportunities in their region. Some of these regions, like I was saying, down the Bega Valley, it's a long way away and typically not well supported. So yeah, the question about how I was guided by an Aboriginal way, as I was saying at the beginning of this, I've sort of struggled for how to bring such a deep and long knowledge, deep knowledge into something so cut and dry as science. But and then in the Gerringong meeting, we talked about how to make data, perhaps how to find Aboriginal relationships to data, and we struggled and came up with some ways of using metadata, of putting the data into context about recognizing its agency. But we made some major shifts when we thought about how people, the context, the ecosystems are all part of how that data came into being, about the data affecting the ways that we manage the land. It's, as I say, I've got a background in ecology, and I felt that the interrelationship and the between the different components of ecosystems between different parts of the country all have equal agency. And I think, as I said, I'm sorry, I'm not being as eloquent as the others. I'm struggling with this stuff, but however, I do feel that it's starting to work. The relationships we built through these road trips have been immensely valuable. Being on country was immensely valuable. There's so much more that comes from understanding. And the picture on the right I put there is perhaps a way of explaining these things. There's electronic sensors hanging off the bottom of that buoy, measuring turbidity, salinity, temperature. However, they're in some water which is connected to more water, which has an oyster farm operating in the background. There's buildings in the background. There's mud flats on the side. These things are all connected. They all affect each other. And if you look over your shoulder behind us, is Bateman's Bay. So lots of people, lots of pollutants. These things are all connected and it's all important. And these things are all vital to consider when we're collecting data. And of course, the connectedness of all of these things, it's key. So, sorry, Jade, I hope I did your work with this some sort of justice.
Mate, you've got to stop putting yourself down. You're putting yourself amazingly. And, you know, truth be told, guys, like I give the scientists the hardest time of all of them. Like I just like messing with their brains. But the thing is, you know, we're going into philosophical spaces. They're not just scientific spaces, and they do become quite challenging. And so, yeah, fine, I can sit back and have a little bit of a giggle as these guys sort of brain boggle, but they just take this so genuinely and seriously, which is lovely, right? It's the way in which we're starting to consider our worldviews. And then again, what that means is, what are we valuing? And Hugh, you're bringing that through beautifully for me, and I'm sure for the rest of people. So I'll let you continue, brother, but stop giving yourself a hard time, man. You're killing it. It's cool.
Thank you. Very generous, as ever. Yeah, it's saving the world in short, I guess. And I'm sure Tilman will have more to say in the panel. And I just wanted to give a plug for December the 2nd. We've got some amazing people that we worked with who will be wowing you too. So the Junga Aboriginal Land and Water Corporation, doing amazing things down the south coast. Pia Winberg, you may have heard of her, a stellar seaweed entrepreneur and farmer scientist. Ewan McAsh, a very innovative oyster farmer and tech entrepreneur. So yeah, please tune back in on December the 2nd. Thank you.
Hey, and thanks, Hugh. And I just want to share so that people do also get a bit of an understanding, is that, you know, we're speaking about research, and a lot of the time we want to just sit with, you know, behind the desk or go out into the field and then hide behind the desk. And one of the beautiful things that Hugh and his team are doing are actually trying to find active ways of engaging Aboriginal communities on the coast, so that we can start to sort of bring this knowledge into this sort of circular economy of knowledge, right? So children are starting to come through school systems where they're being introduced to these senses and these sorts of understandings of, it's not citizen science, it's collecting data, absolutely, but it's the ways in which they're starting to build also relationships with their places. Like, a lot of these kids are disengaged from walking on country, you know? They might go and kick back for a swim here and there, but being with it differently, learning from it differently. So, you know, this is what I'm sort of saying about a lot of this Blue Futures activity. It's not just hiding behind the desk and pushing the data. It's also engaging with communities and also trying to find ways, like a word that Josh used earlier, that reciprocity, like, how are we giving back to these communities? You know, we're sitting with their country that they've been custodians of these knowledges. So how are we giving back? So where can we educate? Where can we influx this community with a bit of funding or seed funding or whatever it might be, right? So, and these are the things that are coming out real strongly through Hugh's activities. So thank you, bro. Really appreciating all of that. It's time to hear from Paul Knight, the CEO of Lands Council. Paul, my questions for you are, what do you feel is the significance of an Aboriginal approach, you know, in the context of what we're speaking today? And how do you feel our communities can actually benefit from this? So our communities, not just Aboriginal communities, I mean like business communities, research communities, you know, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal communities. How do you feel our communities can benefit from following Aboriginal approaches?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jade. I had two great questions. But before I kick off, I forgot a bit of the introduction, which is where am I from? So I'm a Dharawal, born in Dharawal country here in Wollongong. Mum's Ewan, my dad's Dharawal. And I grew up around the Lake Heights, Warrawong, Port Kembla area. So just heavily influenced by the lake and the ocean in my childhood. So we'll just start with that. And it's been interesting listening to the presentations and the journeys that everybody's been on. I do have a presentation, but I'm thinking that I might freestyle it a little bit. I tend to do that. So I just want to pick up on a few of the things that were mentioned first and foremost. Like Joshua and talking about his conversations and relationships, the reciprocity. Michelle speaking about, you know, the typical way of looking at governing and guiding, you know, through a social, cultural, or economic lens. And it's a real dehumanizing of what we do to make it, if you like, put it in a space where we don't feel like we're being influenced in any way, that it's hard data that's being collected. And I want to also reflect back on an early conversation I had with Michelle when we started talking about including Indigenous knowledges in a process. And I said, as long as it's not a tack on, because that's the way these things usually tend to be. You know, we reflect around Indigenous knowledges as that piece where we check in on, does this fit within this context, rather than making it center and core to what we're doing, which became what this project was about. Hugh, I just want to pick up on a couple of things that you said, and one of them was around the data sets, and reflecting on that from a scientific perspective. You know, data sets are really important in that they're recognizing the agency. Jade spoke just a second ago about recognizing the agency of all things within our environment. Data sets do just that. They're a tool to recognize agency, and that shouldn't be forgotten in what we do, because it's really important from that Aboriginal context that we are bringing in all those different perspectives and all those different values, whether it's the tree on the side of the creek, the mountain behind us. These things need to be taken into consideration in what we're doing. And really it comes down to that relationship, the relationship to place and people. You know, we really need to get a good handle of that, I think, if we're going to progress research in these spaces and places. One of the big things that also comes to the fore, and we're hearing it right here and we're doing it right now, is storytelling. You know, through storytelling, we actually build on that understanding. We actually create those spaces where we can appreciate and value each other's perspective. We also get to deconstruct our worldviews and reconstruct them. And that's important. From an Aboriginal perspective, it's that whole that makes really fills the equation. And one of the things that I was reflecting on recently is the whole notion of taking a holistic focus in what we do. You know, and I think really Aboriginal values and constructs, the way we put our communities together and we operate traditionally, is very much from that holistic place. And when I thought about that, I thought, okay, so what is the actual definition of holistic? And I actually came across a definition, I think it was from the Oxford Dictionary, and it went something along the lines of characterized by the belief that the parts of something are intimately interconnected and explicable only by reference to the whole. And if you think about that, you know, it's all these parts. They all have their bits and pieces, and that's what this project is about. We're all coming from different places and spaces, but without understanding all those pieces, we don't understand the whole. We don't understand what it is we're playing in and what we're about. Aboriginal values and construct actually does that. It's the way we've always governed our communities. And to go back to a slide that Michelle put up, you know, we're talking about tens of thousands of years of management experience here. Why would you ignore that? Why in the world would you ignore that when we've got the oldest living civilization here in this country that's been able to sustain themselves in this environment for tens of thousands of years and not even leave a mark? Not even leave a mark. It's through understanding that relationship that we've been able to do that. And this is really important because without understanding those relationships, and, you know, Jade speaks of country, kinship, culture, journey and connectedness, it really comes down to those pieces all coming together. On the one hand, to use Jade's little symbolism there, you know, that's right. And it's bringing those things together. We can look at this in so many ways, and I can slice this and dice this up to any research we're undertaking. It is imperative, in my view, from an Aboriginal perspective, that we actually embrace that whole idea of collaboration, you know, that we don't preference one perspective over another, that it's about coming together and hearing each other, building that relationship, thinking about the values that sit behind what we do and who we are. We need to, we've heard several times today, people talking about relationship. Without that, we don't get the whole. We don't get that full view. It makes no sense. We need to be looking at that. We need to have those relationships and articulate them and be able to go into that uncomfortable position of going, well, you know, this doesn't really make sense to me. You know, I'm picking up on Hugh's comments, you know, I'm not really getting this, but he is. It's actually how you articulate that and finding those ways forward. You know, he may not have thought about the fact that data sets are actually showing agency, are showing that that relationship. It's also about forming. I think one of the things we try to do is ensure that all the voices contribute to forming the direction and understanding of our purpose. You know, by coming together as a group that's probably not often put in the same room, you actually get a much richer outcome. You know, we heard from Joshua about, you know, anticipating and imagining, you know, arts in business. What? How can you do arts in business? Does that? But it's really the journey we all take, and it's recognizing those different agents in the world that surrounds us and bringing them back together. I could go on and on about this. We're running short on time, so I don't want to. I think the main points have been made, and I'm going to throw back to you now, Jade.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks for bringing that home for us. And yeah, wow, the time really has flown. I'm going to really quickly shoot back around this little leadership group, guys, and then I'm going to open the space up for maybe about 10 minutes of questions. I do apologise, and, you know, we are available to be spoken to, well, not me, they are, you know, to be asked questions of outside of this space. But if you want to start throwing some questions in the chat, you know, or you can hold them and you know, maybe raise your hand or something like that. But thanks for being here, Jody. We'll chat later. That just popped up for me. So I just want to ask a question to start the frame for you guys, where some of these mob are coming from. And so the question is going to be, and this is a question that we ask each other all the time. Again, another Aboriginal approach, asking the same question and possibly sitting from a different perspective, asking the same question over and over again. Regularity, routine, and relevance, asking the same question. So the question is today, how do you imagine a blue future? So shooting to you, Josh, how do you imagine a blue future?
Thanks, Jade. The short answer is the future that I want is one where I can jump into the ocean every morning. And what that means, and Paul said something a minute ago, which was, you know, like what does business do next to arts and humanities, next to science? Me being able to swim in the water, in the ocean every day is dependent on what the work that Hugh's doing, the governance work that Michelle's doing. So that idea of us working together so that I can have my swim in the morning is what I want a blue future to be. That's my short answer.
Thank you, Josh. We'll get your long answer another day. Hey, Michelle, how do you imagine a blue future?
Yeah, I think similar to Joshua, I want to maintain the relationships that I have with this beautiful coastline and the oceans. And I want my children to have those relationships, and I want my children's children to have those relationships. And a blue future to me looks like everything we do, all the research we do, all the governance activities we do, all the business development we do is an acknowledgement of country, is in relationship to country. So that, I guess, in short answer is, yeah, what a blue future looks like to me.
Thank you, Michelle. Hey, Hugh, how do you imagine a blue future, bro?
I think that we're talking about down the south coast, down Twofold Bay Way sounds like a good way of doing it. So empowering communities to look after their own waterways, their own coasts. So rather than having industry, government calling the tune and perhaps polluting, damaging waters, give the power back to the people. So empowering people through education, through letting them measure their own water, have their input into how that water is how the country is cared for. That's what I'm hoping for.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Hugh. Hey, Paul, how do you imagine the blue future?
Blue future to me, mate, is really reshaping a worldview. It's about recognizing that the water or the environment around us isn't just a single body. It's actually interconnected to everything else, and really understanding and getting people globally to understand that, you know, there is this relationship that exists and you can't disconnect from it.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Paul. Now, guys, I'd like to open up the floor. If you know how to use the functions, raise your hand. If you don't, just give us a wave, get our attention. If you want to chuck something in the chat, Freya will sort of mediate that for us all. But this is a moment and a space to respectfully ask a question, or you can make a comment. Thank you so much for all the chat activity, guys. It's been awesome and really respected. But yeah, let's throw over to you, and we can start to, you know, field some questions and answers. Who's gonna be brave?
Hey, Jade, how do you imagine a blue future?
Oh, me. No, I just want to be able to go down to the beach whenever I want, like even in the middle of the day, and find abalone here in Wollongong, right? So for me, a blue future is that, you know, all of the resources and, you know, all of that sort of life, sea life that was just such a rich aspect of all of our lives are present, you know, where they are, where they're meant to be. But yeah, like pretty selfishly, I just want to be able to go down, like out there in Wollongong Harbour, or, you know, wherever it is, and find abs again, you know. I don't want to drive all the way down to Eden.
Yeah, fair call.
Nah.
Can I ask Tillman? Tillman just texted me and said he had some thoughts he wanted to. So rather than bring him into the slides, Tillman.
Sure, Tillman, if you'd like to take a moment to share, that'd be great. Thank you, brother.
Well, I was tapping into what Paul was talking and what Hugh was talking about, and your hand, right? The concepts and what we've done, and so in this value stream thinking, value stream design is basically we went down the coast to understand and document companies or that are operating in a engaged relationship on country, right? So these companies are really working on country. And when we talk about kinship, they have suppliers and they have customers. In an abstract way, these are their kin, right? From a company perspective.
Yep.
The problem we have down the coast is connectedness, right? These companies operate in silos and isolations. But there's some beautiful stories that came out of, for example, down Merimbula, when the elders from the community would come down to one of the oyster farmers, and they would have oyster spots high up in the on a piece of rock, and they'll say this is where the sea levels used to be thousands of years ago, and they could read the rocks and the oysters and how the landscape has changed over time. So there's a bit of journey in there for you, you know. It's like understanding the history of the place and how it has moved over time. And I think the difficulties we have is a different value system in those businesses. So where the Western businesses are really focused on operational efficiencies and profiteering, and Indigenous businesses trying to do that, still want to make money, but it's not necessarily in the forefront of their mind. So they have a very different value system, and how you can align those and how you can cross them over. And I'm not sure if Glasgow will give us the answers that we're hoping for, but it's, you know, these 5 concepts can be quite easily translated into this value stream thinking, supply chain thinking. And that's probably the way I look at it, and how I can translate these concepts into my type of research. It's actually not that foreign. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you, Tillman, for just, you know, bringing some sort of life and understanding to the ways in which you guys have been reconciling these sorts of things.
Jade, we have a question from Michelle from Georgia.
Oh, thanks. Hey, Georgia, do you want to ask your question there, darling?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone.
Thank
This
you.
has been so fantastic. I'm in awe. I can't wait to see the other seminars in the following weeks. So my question to Michelle was, how do you think governance frameworks can be rehumanized and include relationships and spirituality and connectedness? And I was thinking about that image you put up of like a kid's toy trying to smush a square into a circle. Is there a way that these frameworks can be rehumanized?
That's a very good question, Georgia. And thank you for your lovely words as well. I think that question is what will occupy me for the rest of my career. I think it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time now, but I think one of the reasons why I got so excited about this project and so excited about the things that we've learnt through this project, particularly from Jade's teachings, is that this is a model. This provides us an insight into how we can start to bring these ideas into governance systems. And so the two case studies we've got kind of come at it from a completely different ways. One is very much working with an established ocean governance framework that's very quantitative and just having a play with what that looks like. And I think without giving too much away, I think where we got to in the end of that is that we have to make space for some of these values outside of those frameworks, but create a way that we can bring them together in a way that coexists respectfully with each other, rather than just not including some of those values, because some of these things just can't be quantified. They can't be brought into, you know, an ecosystem services accounting process, for example. And the other one is actually it's a bit more radical, I guess, for want of a better word. It's actually really thinking about how do we actually start to engage with environmental decision-making processes and environmental decision makers, and start to look at that decision-making process from a completely different angle. And I don't think any one person will come up with that answer to that question, Georgia. I think that's going to be something that we'll be collaborating on and talking about for years to come. But the first step is for us to really get outside of our own comfort zone and start to look differently at the world, which is essentially what, and our worldviews, which is essentially what Jade and Paul and Kath and others have really challenged us to do in a really wonderful way.
It's a beautiful segue into next week's lunchtime lecture, actually. Georgia, great question, honey.
Liked it there wasn't any spoilers for the next seminars as well.
She was very clever, Michelle, then. Did you guys notice this? She did that so artfully and tactfully. So really, we need to get there next week if you can. Like, I know it's an awkward time, and I am really grateful for all of you being here. Next week, we want to speak about Wollongong and Yamba. And this is that story. Come to the mouth of the lake with me. How do we start to see this environmental-based decision-making as relational? How do cultural constructs, how do cultural understandings, Aboriginal understandings of place, relationships to place, influence the decisions that we make? What do values mean? What do we value here, there, whatever it might be, when we are about to make a decision on behalf of everybody or other people? And then what's the value of that tree, you know, or the seaweed, or the whatever it might be, and how do we factor those things in? And so we're really excited to be sharing that with you guys next week. And, you know, like I said, please, you know, if you can find the space, that's great. Things are being recorded as well, as you can see. And the guys here in the team will start to, I don't know, disseminate the information really around the ways in which we're going to be sharing these things. But if there's, well, no, looks like there's time for maybe one more question. If anyone feels the need to ask it, understood if it's not, but I'll pause for a second. Well, that means I'm giving you all a 2-minute early mark on time. You can get back into whatever other bloody crazy stuff it is that you have to be doing. Mad props and respects to Josh, Michelle, Hugh and Paul. Guys, thank you so much for the presentations that you gave, the knowledges that you shared and the ways in which you shared them. I know for me, I've felt thoroughly engaged. Hugh, stop giving yourself a hard time, mate. You're an awesome presenter. Thank you for your questions, for your comments, for your engagement. It really helps the flow and the movement of the knowledge in the space, guys. Thank you so much. Go out there and tell your friends, you know, that this is a really cool space and place to be in. So mad love, everybody. Enjoy your afternoons. We'll see you guys same time, probably a different Zoom link, but you know, we'll see you here to have a yarn about the lake next week, eh? Take care.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. So nice to see everyone.
Everyone, thank you, Jade.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jade.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Jay.